Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar, Tracking the Impact of Supply Chain Emissions. I'm Melissa Raid. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of Sustain.Life. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am joined today by my colleague, Hannah Garfing. Hannah, do you want to introduce yourself and tell everyone what you do at Sustain.Life?
Sure. Hi, I'm Hannah. I work on the product team at Sustain. So that means that I collaborate with engineering, design, and our sustainability team to create the features and functionality that you're going to see in this demo and throughout our application.
Awesome. Thank you. So we have 45 minutes for this webinar today, but it's a really exciting and beefy topic. So we are going to dive in. So for those of you who don't know, we're Sustain.Life. And again, thank you so much for spending some of your day with us today. We're a climate action and sustainability management SaaS platform that helps businesses launch ESG programs, drive towards decarbonization, and align their corporate programs with leading principles and frameworks that your stakeholders are typically asking you to talk about your programs in. So that's things like the UN SDGs, the UN Global Compact, reporting frameworks like GRI, SASB, TCFD. We are a tech-driven team and we're founded by technologists. And we're committed to scaling climate action and all of the data that supports it through our software. We'll show you a little bit of our software and our platform when we get to the demo portion of today's webinar, but we orient on the pillars of measure, manage, and report. And what we do in the platform is we help users compile carbon inventories for their scope 1, 2, and 3, understand their carbon impact, and really contextualize the alphabet soup of ESG, providing resources to our users on supply chain engagement tools and carbon accounting, and really all the capability that you need to have a sustainability program and drive towards net zero. Our mission at Sustain is to make climate action and sustainability accessible to all of the businesses that need it. We really passionately believe across our company that every business needs to understand and really command their carbon footprint in order to meaningfully drive decarbonization and maintain long-term resilience. So we talk about this often at Sustain.Life. We hope we're amongst good company here. Climate is not a Fortune 50, it's not a Fortune 500 problem. This is a collective global problem. And businesses of all sizes are finding themselves compelled to have a strategy to engage here and be part of that solution. And so that's what we're trying to build at Sustain.Life. That's our guiding light. So again, thank you. I want to talk about just a couple of housekeeping items before we dive into our agenda. So Hannah, I know you're driving. Can you give me the next slide? What we're here to talk about today, of course, supply chain engagement, the challenges and the risks that businesses are now facing, not only within their own operations, but from those of their suppliers. We're going to talk about both sides of that coin today. We'll talk about from the enterprise side, really driving decarbonization and ESG through supply chain engagement, as well as for those value chain companies that are now expected to have sustainability programs and have policies and have emissions and have data and furnish all of that information in a reliable and repeatable way to their customers. We will give you guys a brief demo of how we help our users do that at Sustain.Life. And of course, we will save some time at the end for questions. We do ask that you please don't post those anonymously, because if we run out of time, we hope that we don't. But if we do, we will send you responses directly, and we can't do that if we don't know who you are. So please do use the Q&A function. And with that, let's dive into it, because we have a lot to talk about here. So, when we think about the drivers of emissions disclosure, it's really important, I think, to really place a finger on the point that expectations around climate impact have changed. We're seeing a slew of regulation. 2023 saw incredible progress in mandated climate disclosure and sustainability disclosure across global jurisdictions. We won't name them all, but just to highlight a few, in the US, we have the proposed SEC rule. We're all on the edge of our seats for the hopeful October finalization of that rule. In the EU, they progressed a bit more ahead with the CSRD and the new ESRS reporting framework. And then, of course, the dozens of jurisdictions that have essentially TCFD-aligned requirements for all of their large and listed companies. And so we highlight this idea of regulation because the writing's on the wall, right? It's coming, and it's coming hard. And it's not just for the Fortune 50 multinational. It's not just for those huge mega corporates. Even SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises, are eventually going to be covered by this regulation. If we look to the EU, for example, the CSRD is covering 50,000 companies. And that's a huge expansion from the current law, the NFRD, to throw another acronym out there, that mandates less robust disclosure, and only for 11,000 companies. So the companies impacted by these rules are growing, and it's hitting smaller and smaller businesses. And any company and operation, I'll mention, that has entities or operations in the EU is actually subject to that law. So in the US alone, over 10,000 US companies are actually subject to the European CSRD disclosure. And many of these disclosures, like the CSRD, we're not exactly sure where this is going to shake out in the SEC rule here in the US, but we are hopeful that these regulations actually require companies to disclose their Scope 3 supply chain emissions. So, again, even if you're a smaller or more moderately sized business that's not directly mandated by these laws, that supply chain network effect is there. Your key customers need to report on their Scope 3, which means they need information from the suppliers. So let's talk about that supply chain pressure for a little bit, right? Many of the customers here, the large companies, they're not waiting for the final SEC rule, right? They are driving forward with decarbonization in their supply chain and understanding what those emissions are from their key suppliers. I'll say again, like the writing's on the wall here, right? We're not waiting for the legislation. Most companies that have real, legitimate, robust ambitions in decarbonization know that it's all about Scope 3, know that it's all about that 90% of their footprint. And so, while some laggards might be waiting for the rules to finalize, across industries, we're seeing so many leaders that have meaningful decarbonization programs and are asking their suppliers to disclose these emissions to them directly. Let's go to the next slide here. And let's just talk a little bit about some of those leading examples of large companies that are really driving these efforts, not because they're mandated to or regulated to, but because it's part of their leading program. So this summer alone, we saw a huge influx of supply chain decarbonization efforts. And there were a couple of key announcements that I do want to highlight. So Amazon, no introduction needed there, they came out with an exciting announcement around their supplier expectations. And this is in order to achieve their 2040 net zero goal. And they've announced that they're going to require suppliers to report their carbon emissions and reduction goals starting in 2024. And we featured this story a couple weeks back for those who listened to the Week in Sustainability podcast. And so we don't know all of the details around this yet. They didn't share all the details in this initial announcement. So we don't know, for example, if in those decarbonization and target efforts, they'll require suppliers to set science-based targets or have those targets be validated by something like the SBTI, or if they'll be excluding some of their smaller or micro business suppliers, as often is the case. But the magnitude of Amazon requiring this of their suppliers is obviously hugely significant and just telling of where the industry at large is today on supply chain engagement. Another one that I want to share, SAP, another 2024 ambition, in fact. SAP is requiring emissions disclosure along with additional sustainability information, not just carbon, from their supply chain. And they'll notably be requiring 100 suppliers to report not just company-wide emissions, but also product-specific emissions for their key products by 2027. And so that's a really big deal. I think we can see here just a common thread that the expectations are growing, they are building, and suppliers are hearing this from their most important buyers. Similar type announcements I'll just mention. There was a huge conglomerate of pharmaceutical companies, including GSK and AstraZeneca, and they announced similar ambitions around supply chain emissions, decarbonization. And then, of course, we have our leading example and probably the first one to bat, Walmart with Project Gigaton, and where they've been driving decarbonization through their supply chain since that program launched in 2017. So we mentioned this just because we so often get caught up in all of the regulation, but it's not just regulation. There are incredible market impacts of supply chain network effect of these large companies and the thousands of suppliers in their value chain. And the expectations have really matured on the information that these companies are expecting their suppliers to deliver to them in a regular, repeatable, automated, and confident fashion. So before we dive in, and I think we maybe already did that, but let's maybe take a step back. Let's go into just what we're talking about here with Scope 3 emissions and a little bit of a reminder on what these are. So we all know Scope 1 and 2, right? Those are the direct and indirect emissions that come from energy consuming activities from your business. So for those of you that are familiar with the Sustain.Life nomenclature, that's the fuel that you burn and the energy that you buy. But what we're talking about today is Scope 3. And those are all of the emissions from your business activities, upstream and downstream. And they typically represent as much as 90% of any company's carbon footprint. So, this is if you're really driving towards decarbonization, if you're serious on actually achieving net zero as we are as a global community, this is where so much of your effort is going to be spent. Now, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, our gold standard of carbon accounting, classifies all of those activities into 15 distinct categories across upstream activities, and that's anything related to something your business purchases or otherwise acquires, and downstream activities, and that's anything related to the good or service that you as a business produce. So, what we're focusing on today is the scope 3 categories 1 and 2, purchase goods and services and capital goods. So for those that are familiar with greenhouse gas protocol, that's where we're really concentrating on today, really driving into those suppliers and the different methodologies and how you can ask this information of them and what the methodology that they've used really represents in terms of your own scope 3 boundary. So let's talk about those for a moment. If we can go to the next slide, let's talk about some of these scope 3 methodologies. So what we have here is a spectrum, right? And this is dictated by the greenhouse gas protocol. We don't expect everyone on the line to know what that is. That's our job, right? We are the carbon experts. We're the company that wants to translate this big, heavy standard and make it accessible and usable to companies so that they know how to ask for this data and what it really means. So first, and where we see so many of our users start, is a spend-based proxy. And what that means is you're essentially using an economic model. Often it's the US EPA's EEIO dataset. And you're deriving emissions based on the money that you as a business spend on goods and services. The benefit of this, it's using data that companies generally have access to, your expense reports, your bills. And so it's generally where most companies start their efforts. It also, through this, is going to give you an idea of where your emission hotspots are, right? Where are you spending your money? Who are your most important and most critical suppliers? Now, the challenge in using this method is that the emission factors that are used from that model, they're average representations. They don't accurately reflect the specific materials or practices or technologies that are used by your specific suppliers. So this, again, is generally where we see a lot of companies start. It's the least precise, but it's able generally to give you the most complete or robust information because it's based off of data that you as a business have. Oftentimes, companies then move to something like an activity-based measurement. And so that's calculating emissions from something like the weight or mass of materials that are purchased, and again, uses industry average emission factors. So while this is a little bit more accurate than the spend-based estimate, there are similar limitations that arrive because, again, you are using industry average emission factors that might not reflect the specific supplier practices or operations that are going into the creation of the goods and services that you buy or that your customers buy from you. So let's move on to supplier specific. This is where suppliers can allocate emissions from their own inventory. A company would calculate their emissions across their own scope 1, 2, and 3, and they would allocate to their customers and say, because you purchased this many units from us, or we created this many units for you, or you represent this percentage of our revenue, these are the emissions from our operations and our own supply chain that are actually your responsibility and your scope 3 because we made these goods or provided these services to you, the customer. So this requires suppliers, obviously, to have pretty robust organizational or product-specific emissions inventories and the ability to then allocate them across the customers. This is often where at Sustain.Life, we see a lot of our companies and our customers moving towards. They start with that spend-based proxy, and then they're really driving that supply chain engagement to, again, understand from their specific suppliers, well, what kind of energy are you using to make our goods? What kind of materials are you using? What are your specific organizational emissions? And again, how many of those emissions are we responsible for giving you business? And the last one I'll mention here is product specific. And this is the most precise, the most accurate and specific to what you're actually purchasing, but it requires a lot of data that frankly just isn't really reasonably available today at scale. So these are things like LCAs, life cycle analyses, and product level cradle to gate greenhouse gas inventory data. Those studies, as we know, can be onerous, they can be expensive. And while in a perfect world, that's maybe where we all go. And maybe in a decade or two, every single product on the planet has an LCA, has a robust study behind it. Right now, and I'm sure the suppliers on the line, know this all too well, it's just not a reasonable expectation that every company would have that degree of data behind every product. And so we just want to kind of set the stage with these methodologies. I know it can be a lot, it can be a bit technical, but so much of doing this work as a business is really understanding how it is you're doing it and where you're starting and where you want to go and the different level of precision and robustness that's represented in each of these methodologies. So now let's move on and let's just think about when you're the company, the customers that are asking for this information from their perspective. What are you really looking for, right? You're engaging with your supply chain and you're looking for standardized data collection, comparable metrics across suppliers to inform your buying and business decision. And so much of that, right, is auditable records and good data governance, transparency on the methodology and the documentation, not just behind your own sustainability and carbon, but again, of that of your suppliers. And of course, a single system of record. One place where you can do this all, store it all, doesn't get lost on individual desktops, but having a reliable platform that houses all of that data and keeps it consistent for your organization. Okay, and then let's go to the supplier need, right? We wanted to talk about both sides of this coin. And that's really a lot of where Sustain.Life really resonates. We have a lot of customers that come to us because they're getting these customer requests. They need to report to CDP, they need to report into, specific benchmarking requirements for very large companies. And these companies are often mid-sized companies, sometimes thousands of employees, sometimes just a couple hundred of employees. And they're being asked to provide relatively sophisticated and mature sustainability data. And it's becoming quite business critical for these suppliers to not just answer the requests, but to maintain a system where that data is integrated into their existing systems of record. And the outputs, again, are automated and repeatable and scalable across their customer base. And like we know, these customer expectations, they've matured. They're expecting suppliers to have sustainability programs, to maintain ESG metrics and KPIs, to understand their carbon emissions and have confidence and provide transparency into how those numbers were provided. It's not just about the data, but about really understanding and owning that data. And that's what we're all about at Sustain.Life. We're really about empowering and enabling value chain businesses to own this data because it's so core to your operation and it truly is becoming so business critical to maintain those key accounts. So for those suppliers, for the value chain companies on the line, what should you look for, right? Then Hannah, if you can go to the next slide. If you're looking for technology to really drive your carbon accounting, make sure that your platform has not just scope 1 and 2, but also robust capabilities across each of those scope 3, those 15 scope 3 categories that we talked about. If you're a business, again, really looking to drive into your supply chain, look for things like automated surveys, risk scoring, the ability in a supply chain engagement assessment to customize questions, to customize weighting into what's really important to you as a business so that you can benchmark your suppliers and identify where to concentrate your efforts. On the carbon calculator side, it's really important that you look for a platform or services that support across all those scope 3 categories and align with the leading frameworks like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol or something like Science-Based Target Initiative. And if you do report externally, we know that's an increasing need of companies. Look for alignment with the key frameworks that are meaningful or that your stakeholders are asking you to disclose against. So whether that's a questionnaire like CDP or a framework like TCFD or SASB or GRI, let the tech do the work for you and help you with that reporting effort. And I'll say, for the more mature companies on the line, and this is something that we are helping our users with as well, if you need something like the breakout of constituent greenhouse gases as part of your CO2e figure, if you need the breakout of your actual methane or your nitrous oxide, which is, for the record, a requirement of the SEC rule, make sure that your platform can do that. If you need to report your biogenic emissions directly or separately, make sure the platform can do that for you as well. When it comes to things like emissions factors, make sure that your platform is giving you confidence to understand what factors are being used, how often they're maintained, the ability to customize factors or, the ability to customize them to really reflect you as a business and your key decisions. And again, those of your suppliers. And of course, one that you can't talk about tech without talking about this last one, but the ease of use and automation. Look for platforms that have integrations that connect directly with your ERP or accounting or utility systems so that this doesn't have to be a constant manual exercise of manual entry or uploads. Look for those critical integrations because that's what technology is good at, right? Doing so much of that data work for you. Um, so, that's really a lot of what we've built into Sustain.Life. We're incredibly proud of it. We thank you so much for joining us today. We really hope this resonates. And I think I want to pass it off to Hannah to lead a demo just to show you some of the things that we've spoken about in terms of supplier engagement, what that looks like for companies engaging with suppliers, what it looks like for suppliers that need to furnish this information to their most important customers and stakeholders.
Absolutely. Thank you, Alyssa. So, just to give a brief overview of the platform for those of you that might not be familiar with Sustain.Life, as Alyssa mentioned earlier in the discussion, we're really broken down into three main sections. And those sections are going to be measure, manage, and report. For measure, we actually have categories that are, your key business activities and categories for carbon emissions inventories. And so those of you familiar with GHGP, these are the business activities that produce emissions across scopes 1, 2, and 3, as well as the environmental metrics associated with those activities like energy and water consumption, waste diversion, et cetera. We do also provide tracking for social and governance. So we are a full ESG platform. So if you look to create an ESG report at the end of each year, you can do that in our platform as well. Our manage tab is really your next step. So you've started tracking everything and are you like, okay, I have some emissions numbers. How do I reduce these? And how do I start initiatives at my own company to really get, a green program foothold, as well as, share out information to the larger org? We have guides. We'll walk through one of these in our demo. We have over 100 guides of how-tos of how to actually reduce your emissions and start some of these initiatives. We have target setting, carbon offsets, which you can actually purchase through the platform itself. Our supplier assessments, which we'll definitely get into in this demo in particular. A whole area of policies, which is a lot of content that we've actually written that you can take directly and put into your employee or company handbooks. So we, take that load off of your plate. And then we have a whole section of downloads, which are presentation templates, signage, resources that you might need to use, additional decks that you can use, like a good starting point for a lot of things to share out internally as well as externally. And then in our reporting section, it's kind of what it sounds like. You're going to find reports. You will actually find reports for every category that we have under our measure section, as well as a couple other things like a supplier, as well as like events reporting, et cetera. So we provide a lot of this for you rather than you having to do any of the legwork on your end to download some of the data and then create visualizations, et cetera. And we'll show you one of those reports in this demo as well. In sustainability reporting, if you're actually, if you're reporting out against frameworks or disclosures like CDP, TCFD, SASB, GRI, like Alyssa mentioned, we can help you with that as well. And then we do have audit capability in the platform too. For all of these, we have help content, and I'll show you an example of one of those in one of our categories. And we also have previous webinars that you can check out in case you're curious about some of these topics as well. So we are actually going to start in the report section. And as I said, we have a report for you for all of your needs in terms of all of those categories, but we're going to start in purchases. And this is really what Alyssa was talking about. So you're a customer and you're trying to track your scope 3 emissions and you don't currently have a supplier network or supplier management platform that you're using. And you don't really know where to start. And a good place for you to start is within our purchases category in our application. So we use, as she mentioned, we use data from models that estimate the flow of goods and services throughout the economy. So that's that EEIO data. That's that, environmentally extended input output models. And so what we do with these models is we're actually able to take the revenue numbers that you input into the system and calculate an emissions number based off of that. And so what you're going to see here in this view in the purchases report by vendor is that you can check out, hey, these are the vendors that I'm working with. This is how much I'm spending with them. And this is my emissions number as it is associated with the spend and the categories that I've then categorized my spend accordingly. And this is a really great place to start because maybe these vendors don't have these numbers, or maybe you just don't know even who some of your biggest emissions suppliers are. So this is like a really great initial first step. And that's the first one out of the 4 that Alyssa was talking about. I don't know, Alyssa, if you want to add anything here in particular. We're good. Okay. Even better.
Sorry, I'm responding to questions and I was muted and I couldn't
Oh,
unmute myself. I'll mention that I'm responding to the questions directly that I can, and we'll still save as much as we can for the Q&A at the end. But no, I mean, that's exactly right, Hannah. This is about identifying the hotspots in your supply chain so that you know where to drive your most meaningful efforts, right? If 20 suppliers make up 80% of your emissions, that's where you focus your efforts. That's where you engage.
Exactly. So now you have a list of kind of where you need to start. And now you're ready to take that next step and actually get some more information from your suppliers. So what we allow you to do is, okay, you've got a list here. Why don't we go into the manage section into the supplier assessment area? So we have a whole hub just for supplier network and supplier tracking. As a customer, the most important things are going to be the views that I'm going to show you here. And then I'll show you kind of the supplier side and what you would be seeing as a supplier that receives an assessment from a customer. So from a customer's perspective, you're coming in here, you're immediately getting a hub or like your homepage of a table with all of the vendors that you've maybe sent a supplier assessment out to. Key information like their name, facility location, who the contact is for that vendor, the score of the overall assessment, as well as the status. So you can do a lot of your project management in here. So after you send out the assessment, we tell you like if it's not started, if it's in progress, or if it's completed, and then the date that's associated with the most recent status update. The way that you can actually add suppliers to this is either one-off manually in case you only have a few and you want to do this one at a time just to do some checks, or you can do it as a bulk upload. The fields are going to be the same. So you just tell us if it's a company-wide or a facility specific, which we'll get into in a second, who your supplier contact is, what their email is, and then a due date. So we are defaulting to 30 days from the day after you are sending it out. But if you want to change that due date, you can. And our system also will send out reminder emails before the due date comes. So again, all of your project management is already handled in our platform for you, which is really good. Once you send this out, the supplier will receive an email where all that they have to do is click on a button, make a password, and then fill out an assessment. As a customer, you will be able to view one of those completed assessments here. So the completed assessment is actually going to be broken out into, or the default one, I should say, is broken out into 5 main sections. And those categories in our assessment follow the best practices of the Responsible Business Alliance Code of Conduct and ISO standards, and represent like a very robust, but pretty manageable approach to establishing a formal ESG supply chain engagement process. And the reason is because, we have a number of questions that we're already defaulting for you. It's a good way to get a starter amount of information from your suppliers. And we're keeping this all here so that year over year, you can see trends over time to see where they're improving or if they have additional information for you, et cetera. So each of these sections is going to give you an actual score. And then we're going to give you a total score as well for each of the supplier assessments. If you as a customer want to change any of the questions, add additional questions, have things that are maybe not related to a score, but you still want to require your suppliers fill it out just so that you even get some information back from them, you can do all of that in our platform and we can work with you. Everything is completely customizable and flexible. So if you are more interested in, say, human rights versus responsible purchasing, that's something that you can tell us and we can change the weighting accordingly. Or again, add your own custom section at the bottom and just have questions that are related to your industry or your specific company there in case we don't cover it for you. And that's very easy for us. So from a supplier perspective, I'm going to show you what one of these really looks like. So you're going to get the email, you'll land in the platform and you'll start an assessment. And essentially, you'll first need to actually just confirm the company information. If you selected facility details versus company-wide details, like the customer did, that will appear here. And as a supplier, you can come in and change that if you need to. But that's because each facility might have different answers to each of these questions versus like a company-wide answer from an assessment standpoint. So you'll be asked this information at the front. You'll get questions around they're mostly yes or no questions. You can also put unsure. We have the ability to add comments and upload attachments if you need to. And that means that the customer that you're sharing this with will also be able to see these notes and attachments just to, get a sense of your complete answer. You can also, come in here as many times as you want, save as a draft, complete with like additional people on your team in case you don't have all the answers. Usually the customers that we work with are giving suppliers around like 4 to 6 weeks to complete. So it's a good amount of time. And as you are filling this out, we basically walk you through each section. And then once you complete each one, you get a check mark in each of these areas. I want to just call out one thing in particular, which is going to be this question here, which talks about if you're able to provide actual or allocated greenhouse gas emissions by customer. And, this is our standard template that we're showing you here. And like companies can request not only scope 3 emissions data from their suppliers, but they can also ask for the specific allocation method, which we have a drop down here for. which is really making sure that you can understand what those numbers are actually based on. And so if suppliers cannot allocate emissions at the customer level, they do have the option to indicate that, hey, I do track this and I want to report my scope 1 and 2. And you can still monitor which suppliers are measuring their emissions and which ones are actually allocating emissions to the specific good or service that you purchase from. In case you have anything to add here, Alyssa, I can pause for a second.
Nope, you're crushing it. I'm saying, welcome to the sustainability team. You're doing it, hon.
Perfect. So this is one of those questions that we would want to just call out and show you as a supplier as well as a customer that you're able to answer and ask. As a supplier, once you finish all of this, you'll receive an email saying that you completed the assessment and you'll be able to come into the platform and, see that completed score. There's one thing that you get to see that customers don't, which is actually recommended actions from our platform. And so that means that, let's say that you come to a question, do you have an environmental policy? And you hit no and you submitted this. When you come back in and you see your scoring, we will actually have actions that say, hey, in case you want to improve year over year, you should take the next step here and take this action to add environmental policy. And maybe your action there is literally just giving you the text to add to your company handbook or employee handbook. And we have a number of these throughout the supplier assessment. So depending on how your answers come through, you will get basically like free recommendations from Sustain.Life as a supplier on how to take those next steps to keep improving as a supplier for that overall company. Wonderful. So from there, I'm actually going to move on to a specific area of the application for measure. So you can actually see how you're going to be able to track your scope 1 and 2 emissions. So 95% of the time, our users are starting with their energy related emissions. So that's what Alyssa was talking about, that scope 1 and scope 2. And for us, that really means our buildings and vehicles categories. So I'm going to walk you through what one of our categories looks like. They're all pretty much formatted and structured the same way. You're always going to have something at the top here, and you're going to start with whatever category you're in your configurations. And that's because you need to tell us first and foremost what it is that you as a company track. And so you as a supplier, you're able to come in here and you can say, okay, I in buildings for my specific location track electricity. You can tell us if it's without contractual instrument or with contractual instrument, so we can do market or location based. If it's with contractual instrument, you can select your electricity provider. I'm going to say it's Public Service and Electric Gas Co. based on my zip code here. Direct line microgrid, fossil fuel. So I don't have a custom factor, but I am going to select this. Basically, whatever you select in your configurations page here is what you're telling us you receive in either your utility or energy bill, and you're able to fill out in the data entry section of the platform. The only other thing I want to call out here is that you can add custom sources, as Alyssa mentioned earlier in the presentation. This is really important in case, you have something here that is specific to you and you want to make sure that your emissions calculations are as accurate as possible. And we have help content all about this. As I keep talking about help content, I do just want to quickly show you, if I can get rid of this just for a second. Here, we have help content as it pertains to every category in our platform. And as I mentioned, we also have previous webinars and future webinars that you can always check out. But all of this has a step-by-step of exactly what might be important when you're tracking in a specific category, how-tos, FAQs, the methodology, etc. So for me, I've selected a couple things. I'm going to hit save. I'm going to immediately be taken to our data entry page, where again, you're only going to see what I said is applicable to my company and at that specific location. In your data entry, you're just going to fill out your amount. You can fill out spend if you want to. All of this is, again, completely customizable, just like it was for configurations. You tell us the unit of measure that you're using. If you use a different currency type, you can tell us that too. And what you're seeing here on the right is we're actually doing calculations for you on the fly. So you enter your amount, and then we are able to give you an emissions number. That's, the bread and butter of what Sustain does in terms of our carbon accounting platform and capabilities. So I'm just going to even increase this number a little bit just so you can see these numbers go up. And I'm going to save this, and I'm going to be taken into what we refer to as our ledger view. So my most recent one is going to come to the top. It's going to be highlighted. This is my location where I just entered some information. If you have any groups or anything, which we also have help content, and I think even previous webinars that cover, this will show up here too. And then you're just getting a summary of what your spend is and your emissions is for this particular entry. You can view or edit or delete anything that you bring into the platform. So it's really easy. What I just showed you though is just how to add data into the platform for a single location for a single month. And that's like a lot of work if you're going to do this over and over. So we have a few other ways that you can do this that basically streamline the data entry process for you. The first one is going to be bulk import, where you can actually upload a year's worth of data for a single location in any category that you want, which is really great and what a lot of our actual customers do. And the second one is going to be integrations. And anything with a lightning bolt here in this ledger, it's going to say, it's basically telling you that the data is coming in through an integration. Right now, we actually partner with utility aggregators to provide integrations with over 900 providers, representing 90% coverage. And the list includes most of the major utility providers in the US, along with a robust international coverage. And if you work with a utility provider that we don't have, it's not hard for us to set up. We've done it in the past with multiple customers. It only takes a couple of weeks, and then we do some tests, and then you're good to go. The beauty of integrations is that you set it and forget it. Once you're actually set up and everything is in there, the information, anything that you have historical that's in your utility platform will just come right into our application. And you don't have to be in here every month checking your data or adding it in manually. You can do it as often or as infrequently as you'd like to. But all of your data is coming in, your calculations are being calculated. So it's good in the background for you. So from there, I'm going to walk you through a little bit of our manage section, specifically just one action. So as I mentioned, actions are basically how-tos on something. Like, we have over 100 actions, and they help you with your ESG initiatives, as well as actually reduce your emissions numbers that you have for each of your categories. So I'm going to start with a really simple one that might resonate with people, whether they're, even at home, this is something that you can do, but I'm going to start with smart workplace. I'm going to go to this really easy one, install LED lighting. And this is how how all of our actions are set up. Some of them might have even additional information, but all of your actions, you're going to come in, you're going to see a description of that action. You're going to see why it matters in case you need to make a case back to the company, or you're just like, oh, why is this actually important? You'll see the scope alignment that the action has, whether it's scope 1, 2, or 3. You'll have guidance and tasks, and this is really your checklist on how to actually complete the action. So we lay it out for you. We've got some pre-work. We've got the stakeholder meetings that you need to actually hold and who those stakeholders are. We have the implementation guidelines, so that's step by step on exactly what you need to implement. And then we also tell you what to measure. So in terms of those qualitative and quantitative KPIs, this is all here. We've written hundreds of these, and all of this can additionally be linked to assessments and certifications. So in case you're reporting out to CDP, this is for disclosing changes made to meet climate change related targets. You did this. You can talk about it. You have evidence that you did it. And if it's something that's important to you and you see an action that you like, we basically have a full project management tool around the actions that you add to what we call your roadmap. And so that's why mine says remove from roadmap, because I've already added it to my roadmap. And you can track it. So what you saw here also is saying that, hey, I even set a due date for this. I have completed 2 of the 9 tasks I need for this action. I know what my next steps are, and I feel empowered by the platform to take the next steps. The other thing that I'm going to show you for the action here is actually around policy builder. So as I mentioned before, with the environmental stewardship policy and the supplier assessment, we have a lot of content in the platform that is for you to basically take and just easily add to your company handbook or employee handbook. For this particular action, you might want to add some language around efficient lighting. And when you want to do that, we have policies that are linked to specific actions. You can hit add to handbook. You can even change the text as you wish in case you have different things that you want to add here. Say tackling floors 1 and 2 in facility X first, and then tackling the 3rd floor. And then you can add it to your handbook. We have a whole section here in Manage for your policy handbook that is here. These are all of the policies that I've added to my handbook. I've customized all of the language in here. You can download your handbook. It comes out as a really nice PDF. You can also just, again, at any point, copy and paste some of this information there. But, we have all of this for you, and it's just a really good resource for anyone that's maybe starting out. And as I mentioned, here's that even environmental stewardship policy. And all of this is here for you and for your ease. The last thing I'm going to walk you through is going to be the report section. And I'm just going to show you the report section of buildings, which I actually have pulled up here already. So basically, we have reports, as I mentioned, for all of the categories that are within our measure section, as well as a couple other areas of our application. And this is data analytics for your business. We're doing a lot of this data visualization for you. It's built on top of Power BI. You can crunch the numbers, view the data, view the trends and performance over time, compare the performance across locations, intensities, et cetera. All of our reports will have basically a summary tab of a building's summary, for example, or a waste summary, et cetera. where you can see some of these trends here. You can do additional filtering if you want to at any point on the left side. And then if you want to come into, say, electricity summary, you can see we break out by market-based emissions, location-based emissions, et cetera. And all of our categories also have a drill down tab. So any single line item that you've added, you'll be able to find that in a drill down. And all this is your data. So if you want to do further analysis on it, you can. If you want to see a different visualization, you can. But the idea is that you have all of these tools that are empowering you to start tracking specifically your scope 1 and 2, and of course your scope 3 as well, if that's of interest within the Sustain.Life platform. So I know we only got to touch a little bit of what we really can provide in the overall application, but I am aware that we are running out of time. So I do want to save some time for Q&A. So I'm going to come back here and hand it over to Alyssa for the Q&A.
Thanks so much, Hannah, and thank you for that demo. I've been furiously typing answers to as many answers as I can to these questions. So please all view those in the open Q&A. You should all have access to them. But let me hit a couple that I wasn't able to hit, and some of the ones also that I think are really critical and perhaps most valuable to the group. So we got a question about science-based targets and essentially increased requests from customers on their suppliers, or even the other way around, to set science-based targets. And that is something that I want to mention. We've built the logic of SBTI and a couple of the other net zero standards into the platform. And so we have a whole target setting module that we didn't show you today, but that essentially takes all of the data that you've baselined in the Sustain.Life application, and we've built in all of the logic and guardrails and thresholds to guide users on how to set an SBT. We've also shortcutted in that what we call a starter target. And for those familiar with SBTI and likely quite relevant to many of the companies on the line, that's the SME, the small, medium-sized business kind of pathway that SBTI sets out for those smaller businesses. So I posted the link to that in the Q&A. There's a whole separate webinar on that, so we can't get into it today, but I do want to make everyone aware of that resource. We also got another question around providing verification of emissions, and this is a great question. So Sustain.Life is a carbon accounting platform. We don't provide verification services. We do, however, provide a verification module where through that module, you can invite your verifier, your third-party chosen provider, into the platform to perform the verification work directly in the platform. And so that provides one central place where you can view all the same data, communicate back and forth. And what's so great about that is all of the information that the verifier is going to ask you. Where did this activity data come from? Do you have a bill? What's the supporting documentation? Was any manipulation done to this? What emission factor did you use? What's the data source of that emission factor? What's the last time it was updated? What formula did you use to convert that? Everything a verifier asks, and for those that have gone through this process, you know how onerous it can be, is built into what we are surfacing to the verifier in that platform. So for every single line item calculation that the platform has done for you, your verifier already has transparency into that information, and you don't have to go chasing down spreadsheets and tabs and links and sources. It's all in one place. So talk about data governance. That's it. That's what it looks like. The bills are attached. If it was coming through an integration, the notes are attached. Everything's there. That's another one that we have a whole nother webinar on, a whole nother feature. I posted the link in the Q&A answer. So please, everyone, do check that out. I'm realizing we probably should have made this webinar an hour because there's a lot of questions that we didn't get to. And I'm so sorry for that, but we are at time. I want to respect everybody's time. I guess I'm trying to look for one more question that can maybe be the most valuable. Yes, there's one more I do want to share. We got a question about energy use intensity or other intensity metrics. And that's a really important one, right? Because your absolute performance, your total energy, your total emissions, your total waste, important. But what if you're growing, right? Your numbers may go up. And so decoupling that growth from your KPIs or from your impact, we do have standard intensities built into the reporting platform that Hannah went through. So you can normalize or see intensities by square footage, by revenue, by headcount, by capita. And so, yes, that's in the platform because we know that's such a meaningful way for you to talk to your stakeholders. We unfortunately have to leave you, but we want to thank you all so much for joining us. There are a bunch of questions. I know we didn't get to them. We will send you all answers as best as we can because there are a lot. And we just thank you so much for your time. If you have any questions about Sustain.Life, what we do, who we are, more about our platform, please do reach out. I will drop a link in here as well. We are happy to show you a demo. Our team would love to talk to you, understand your challenges. We've built a platform that we hope addresses them, and that's really what we want to do. So please don't be shy. Please do reach out to us at Sustain Life, and we look forward to connecting with you all. Thank you so much.